killed Laura Palmer? That is the mystery that is to be solved in the show Twin Peaks. A very strange small town gets shaken to its very core when one of the young teenagers gets murdered. The first season has 8 episodes, but what if I can solve it in 1 or 2, maybe 4 or 5? The challenge that I'm setting for myself is to solve the murder before the show reveals it. In this video, you're gonna see me try to solve the mystery after each episode that I watch. I'll watch an episode, take some notes, and then record myself work through the different clues and suspects. And I'll lock in an accusation. So that way, at the end of this video, we can go back and see exactly how right or wrong I was after each and every episode. Now, it probably seems obvious, but spoiler alert for the first season of Twin Peaks. I also apologize if the focus goes in or out. You know, I got a lot going on. In the 2-hour pilot episode of Twin Peaks, we get the full foundation of the mystery ahead of us. We start meeting townspeople, the sheriff, the FBI agent who has come to solve the case, and all the stuff that we need to become invested. The pilot opens with a body being found in plastic on a beach, and we find out that it is the body of Laura Palmer. We see things like how devastated her parents are. We see how the kids at school handle the news. But most importantly, and immediately, we meet Bobby. Bobby is her boyfriend and quite obviously our first red herring. A red herring is a plot device used in mysteries to help misdirect you from the real killer by giving you an obvious alternative. Now, Bobby is immediately suspect number 1 for the police department and the audience watching at home. And like in Scooby-Doo, since he's the first suspect we've met, it's kind of safe to assume that he didn't do it. I'm pretty sure that Bobby is innocent just based off of this pilot episode alone. However, we learn some information later in the episode that, you know, it could change things. The next suspect that the show very blatantly throws into our face is the mysterious Jay, or James. James is this mysterious biker guy who is in love with Laura, and it appears that Laura has been cheating on Bobby with him. But don't feel bad for Bobby, because he's cheating too. James is actually the last person to see Laura alive, and he doesn't have an alibi for that night. He tells Laura's best friend that she was talking crazy that night and then ran off into the darkness, never to be seen again. Now, he's pretty obviously another red herring, because all of the evidence in the pilot episode leads directly to him. Laura's wearing a necklace with half of a heart. He has the other half. Her diary, which the police find, says that she was with Jay that night. His name starts with a J, and he was with her that night. So it would be pretty wild if it was just case closed after the first episode. So it's safe to assume that James is also innocent. Plus, at the end of this episode, the FBI agent and the sheriff arrest James, and we see a mysterious hand digging up his half of the necklace that he had hidden in the woods. But he's in jail, so it couldn't have been his hand. So with the show's main 2 suspects out of the way, let's break into a little bit of who I think the real suspects may be. We know that the killer has murdered Laura. We also know that a second girl that was with Laura was attacked but managed to survive. She actually gets away and is in the hospital in a coma. 2 victims, same high school, same night. What makes it even more interesting is that the FBI agent finds a tiny little letter R hidden inside of Laura's fingernail. A clue that lines up with another investigation that the FBI agent has been working on for a while. We got a serial killer on the loose. We also find out that Laura has been involved in some kind of crazy drug operation or something. As you can see where I have this card that says cocaine, she had cocaine. And with the cocaine was a key to a lockbox, and the lockbox had a bunch of cash in a magazine called Flesh World. And in the magazine, there was a published picture of our coma patient, you know, the other girl who was attacked with Laura. And she's been published in the magazine, so I don't know what the that's about. And remember when I said that James said that Laura was talking crazy that night before she ran into the dark to be murdered? Well, he said that she was talking about she had gotten herself into this crazy situation and how she thinks that her boyfriend Bobby may have killed a guy. So right here I put killed a guy. So although I do think Bobby is a red herring and he probably didn't do it, he did something. It's safe to assume that we've met the murderer in this episode. That's just kind of standard mystery procedure. You want to introduce who actually did it as soon as possible, so that way you don't get to the end and some character that we've only known for about 45 minutes is the one who did it, and the audience doesn't feel cheated. The problem is we are introduced to so many characters in this episode. I keep doing this as if I'm like, giving a formal presentation. I did it again. My number one suspect for this episode is Andy, the crying cop. He is one of the cops working on this case, and he just keeps crying all the time. He cries when he sees the dead body. He cries when he sees the attack victim. And I think that this is a ploy so that we don't suspect him. He's crying and obviously so sympathetic. He couldn't possibly do it. A similar trick is used in the first Harry Potter book with Professor Quirrell and how he's, this pathetic, stuttering coward. There's no way he has Voldemort on the back of his head.
Poor stuttering Professor Quirrell.
We also meet Andy almost immediately. Like, he is right there when they discover the body. And we keep learning unnecessary information about this character that really doesn't seem very important to the plot so far. Like, in a line towards the end of the episode, we find out that he's been drinking a lot of decaffeinated coffee lately. In shows like this, every little detail is important, so it must be important for us to know that he's been up at night. And why has he been up at night? Maybe he's been up all night murdering. This is my first official guess, and I am locking it in. That's right, so at the end of this whole thing, we can rewind to this part of the video and you can see that I got it absolutely right. Episode 1. Which, if I do nail it, that would be sick, but it could also be very embarrassing when I'm really, really off. Now, before we jump into episode 2 and hopefully learn a lot more information, I want to go into a few more other suspects and clues from the first episode. When they find the spot where the attacks happened, they find this note that says, "Fire, walk with me." I have absolutely no idea what that means. I do have it here. I have it right here. It's not attached to anything or anybody yet. We also meet this really abusive, angry guy named Leo. I believe he's married to the lady that Bobby is cheating on Laura with. And lastly, if you take a look at this note right here, Town Conspiracy. The major B-plot for this show seems to be about the business that this lady Josie has inherited. And she's got beef with her sister-in-law, who I don't know what's going on there. But Josie, the business owner, is actually in a relationship with the sheriff. And it seems to be important because, it is the B-plot. And typically the B-plot will work its way to being somehow related to the A-plot. It could be a thing where the whole town killed her, maybe? I don't know. All right, Andy the Crying Cop is my guess for episode 1. Let's move on to episode 2. All right, episode 2. As you can see behind me, things have gotten complicated. This episode, we really start cooking up some more suspects and evidence, and we even get a few answers to some mysteries that we had in the pilot. So the episode starts off with Dale Cooper, and this he's pretty strange. The episode opens with him hanging upside down. And since he is our main character, or at least the detective character, I imagine there's some mysteries directly tied to him that are, probably nothing to do with who killed Laura Palmer, just like mysteries that unravel about himself. Another character that we don't know a whole lot about yet, but seems to be very important, is Audrey. I have her listed as the problem child. Now, just a refresher, if you haven't seen the show in a long time, or if you've never even seen the show, Audrey is the daughter of the businessman, Ben. Now, in the pilot, Ben is the one who is like making that deal, and then his daughter, Audrey, ruins the deal by talking about the death of Laura Palmer. Anyway, Audrey starts hitting on Agent Cooper at his breakfast, and it's very interesting because we don't know anything about her, but we know that she's important because she's like a key character. So after this beginning of the episode that's very focused on Agent Cooper, we move on to more of the mystery solving, and we get tossed right into the autopsy report of Laura Palmer. Now, the only real key information that we learned from the autopsy report that we didn't already know is that Laura had relations with at least 3 men on the day that she died. I'm fairly certain that there's only one killer, so I'm going to say that maybe the 2 other relations partners are just her boyfriend Bobby and the guy she was cheating on Bobby with, James. But you never know. As we find out in this episode, Laura has a lot of friends. At the end of the autopsy scene, the doctor that's talking about the autopsy says, who would do something like this? And then we hard cut to Leo, the abusive husband trucker guy, and his wife is yelling his name, Leo, and it happens so quickly that it sounds like his name is answering the question. And that's pretty straightforward. I don't know if they would give us such a straightforward accusation in the edit if he wasn't just a red herring. I think we're supposed to think that it's him. Now, in this same moment, we find a shirt of Leo's and it's covered in blood. He gives it to his wife to wash with the rest of his laundry. She finds it and she hides it in a drawer, which again is pretty incriminating. However, I just don't think that they would be just blatantly saying like, yo, hey, Leo's the killer and here's a bloody shirt if he was actually the killer. I feel like they would have more tact and they would try to disguise that he's the killer more. Really, I think Leo is just the main red herring for this episode because we learn a ton about Leo in this episode. We find out that he has been doing business with Bobby, Laura's boyfriend, and Bobby's best friend, Mike, all the way up here. I put kinda lame with his card because he doesn't really do much. So he's doing business with Bobby and Mike, and Bobby and Mike owe him a ton of money that they can't get to him because it was the money that we found in Laura's safety deposit box, which of course has been taken by Agent Cooper and Sheriff Truman. And they're super worried about what Leo is going to do to them because they don't have the money. And they should be worried because Leo is a psychopath, and we see him like, use a soap sock to be abusive. He's just a terrible guy, and I'm pretty sure that he's like the cocaine dealer, and that's the business that they're doing. I think it's Bobby and Mike kind of deal the cocaine in town. Leo gets them the drugs. Am I gonna get demonetized for talking about all this stuff? And I will say, all of the mysteries that get solved in this episode, we get a whole bunch more mysteries added on top. Like we get the answer to the question, why did Laura have cocaine and money in her lockbox? We know that now. But what we don't know is, it turns out Big Ed was drugged in the bar fight, and I don't see what he has to do with anything at all. See, Big Ed is actually James's uncle, but I don't see how he would even be involved with Laura's death, and he seems like a general good guy. The only thing is he is cheating on his wife, like everyone in this town is, but I don't see how he's tied into the murder, but he got drugged. So maybe the cheating and the drug is like a separate subplot. Speaking of subplots, we mentioned in the last part about the town conspiracy. Well, in this episode, we find out that Catherine, who's the evil sister-in-law of Josie, who's now the owner of the mill, she's cheating on her husband with Ben, Audrey's dad, the businessman. And they talk about how they're trying to bankrupt the mill, and in this conversation, they talk about maybe just burning it down. Now, this show is notorious for being weird, and we get a few like weird moments in this episode. Like, Laura's mom has a breakdown in her living room, and during it, she sees like a guy hiding behind her couch, and then a one-armed man is sneaking into the ICU where the other victim is in a coma. Oh, and how could I forget? We have an eyewitness, the log lady. We met log lady last episode. She's just this like crazy lady who carries this log around, and she tells Agent Cooper that her log saw what happened that night, but he doesn't really feel comfortable asking the log like directly, and so she gets upset and like huffs off. Now let's talk about my suspects for this episode. This episode follows Laura's best friend, Donna. Donna's right here. She's got the best friend card. The majority of this episode is figuring out her feelings because she's very sad and depressed that her best friend is dead. However, it has brought her and James closer together. And she realizes that her and James are in love. And she feels conflicted because she loves him and he loves her, but that was the guy that her best friend was cheating on her boyfriend with. That can't be allowed. But now that Laura's gone, they can be together. Now, please remember, Donna is dating Mike. everyone in this town is cheating on each other. And they don't really seem to care about hiding it either. Like, Donna has James over for dinner, like with her parents. Her parents who know she's dating Mike. I forgot his name because he's lame. And I will say for a moment, I did think, well, maybe Donna killed Laura to get James, but that just kind of felt too far-fetched. Like, it doesn't really tie into any of the other clues or motives that we really know. Like, why would she attack that other girl? I don't know, but at the end of this episode, it gets strange. At the end of the episode, we meet Dr. Jacoby. Now, he is the doctor we met in the pilot for like maybe 2 minutes. He's a really strange guy, and we find out that he was actually like seeing Laura, like I think romantically, or at least professionally, because she's sending him tapes about her life. Oh, and by the way, this is where we get the big reveal from the pilot about who stole the necklace. See this note card right here where I said who dug up the necklace? It was Dr. Jacoby. And he's holding the necklace and crying as he's listening to the last tape that Laura sent him. I think this heavily implies that he was also in love with Laura, so maybe she was seeing him as well, or maybe he was just obsessed with her. Anyway, in this last tape, she's telling him about the mystery man that she's been seeing in the woods. And right before she reveals more information, like maybe the identity of who this mystery man is, Dr. Jacoby puts his headphones on so that we, the audience, can no longer hear what she's saying. So after that reveal with Dr. Jacoby, I am very suspicious of him, but I'm not confident to lock him in as my guess. Which makes me think, well, okay, maybe I can just lock in my same guess from the last part. Hey, but guess what? Andy the crying cop isn't even in this episode. I think he shows up for like one scene at the very beginning, and he doesn't say or do anything. So I'm starting to second guess myself on that pick. Like, I felt really confident. I thought I nailed it on the first episode, but now I'm not so sure. Because on one hand, this episode does seem to revolve a lot about the mysteries and reveals of some subplots. Not necessarily the main death, which is Laura Palmer's death. We learned more about the cocaine dealing and some of the other shady aspects of the small town. So maybe that's the reason we don't see much from him this episode, because this episode isn't really about the main mystery, it's about the subplots. And so it makes sense to make him take a step back so that way we don't get overly suspicious of him. But also, if Andy is the killer, you would think he would be a little bit more involved. Like, you don't want to get to the big reveal and then everybody be like, Andy the crying cop? He was barely in the show. But it is only episode 2. So anything could really go at this point. This is really difficult. I just don't think it's any of the main suspects that they're throwing in our face this episode, like Leo, Bobby, or Dr. Jacoby. I think they all have to do with other issues and other mysteries in this small town. I think Laura Palmer's death is going to be someone not so obvious. So I think I'm just going to lock in Andy the crying cop again. I think that's my best guess, given the information that we have got so far. Maybe he is the mystery man that Laura's been meeting in the woods, or maybe the mystery man and the killer aren't even the same person, and that's also a red herring. All right, I've locked in my pick for episode 2. Let's jump to episode 3. Welcome to episode 3, or as I would like to call it, what the is going on? So let's just jump right into this. We open this episode with Benjamin Horn. He's the businessman who's sleeping with the sister-in-law to try and burn down the mill that Josie owns. I know this is getting complicated. Well, Benjamin's brother, Jerry, he comes back from a big business trip and he brings some sandwiches. And they start eating these sandwiches in a super weird, freaky way because they're a couple little freaks. And that's not all. After they finish their sandwiches, they hop in a canoe and they travel to a casino where they keep ladies of the night. And it becomes pretty evident that they are frequent visitors. This casino is called One-Eyed Jack's, and it's a pretty sketchy place. I think this could maybe be where Laura started to get involved in some of the sketchy stuff that she was doing, like the cocaine dealing and maybe being a lady of the night? A night lady, if you will. Like, we do find out later in the episode that Ben, the businessman, remember, he is the father of Audrey, right? Well, Audrey has a brother, the son of Ben, who is, I think he's like special needs. And so Laura would tutor him. And apparently Laura was considered to be like a part of the family. And we find out that Ben used to sing to Laura, which is weird. So maybe being such a close part of their family, Ben got a little too attached and convinced her to come to One-Eyed Jack's and be a part of the night ladies. Hey, not that there's anything wrong with that. There's some ladies in the day, and there's ladies at night. Now, he's definitely the suspect that this episode focuses on, kind of like how last episode focused on Leo, the abusive trucker guy. And while he is being focused on in this episode, they don't go too hard at pointing the finger at him, which makes him feel a little less like a red herring and potentially a major suspect. I mentioned Leo, the abusive trucker guy, and he comes back up in this episode because he meets up with Bobby and Mike for their big drug deal. You know, Leo's giving them the next batch of cocaine, but they don't have the money. Remember, because Laura has the money in a safety deposit box that was taken by Dale Cooper and Sheriff Truman. Anyway, while they're hashing that out, oh, I don't have the money. What? You don't have the money? No, I don't have the money. Oh, well, then you can't have the drugs. A mysterious masked man shows up for like 2 seconds. Now, this leads me to believe that this mystery masked man in the woods is probably the same mystery man that Laura said that she was meeting in the woods the night that she died. And I'm also starting to think maybe this mystery masked man is the kingpin of this entire operation. I thought maybe Leo was the guy running all these drug deals, but maybe Leo has a boss, and it's this mystery masked man. And I think I'm right, because Leo seems more concerned about who his wife is cheating on him with than he does about the drug money. Oh, by the way, the person that his wife is cheating on him with is Bobby. Are you guys following along? At the end of this drug deal thing, Leo tells Bobby that Laura was a messed up girl and that maybe one day he will tell him more about it, which means that Laura was involved in some stuff that even Bobby didn't know about. So it's pretty safe to assume that if she was involved in things that he didn't know about, he's probably not the one who killed her. All right, now let's talk about what our special agent FBI Dale Cooper is up to. Agent Cooper and Sheriff Truman are in the woods with the whole police department, and they're doing a Tibetan mind trick. Basically, he has someone read out the name of all of the suspects. And then when he hears the name, Agent Cooper takes a rock and throws the rock at a bottle that's way over there. And he doesn't go into super detail, but I think the idea is if he hears the suspect's name and he throws the rock, his subconscious will make him hit the bottle if there's something more to that suspect. So they start going through the list of all of the J names in town because I think they believe that the J that she talked about meeting that night in her diary is the same guy who killed her. Now, I thought we had cleared up the whole J mess because James was a J that she met that night, and we know that for a fact. And I thought they knew that for a fact, but they seem to believe that there's a different J. And maybe they're right. Maybe the mysterious man in the woods, the mysterious man that Laura's been meeting in the woods, is a J name as well. Now, with this whole Tibetan rock throwing thing, it's kind of set up to be like, oh, Agent Cooper, what a weird guy. However, I don't think that this would be included in the show if there wasn't some sort of rhyme or reason for the results. So when they're going through it, he completely misses by a mile when they read off certain names like James or the waitress who works in town. But when Dr. Jacoby's name is read, the rock hits the glass, but it doesn't shatter it, and he makes that note. Now, we know Dr. Jacoby does have a lot of mystery tied up with him, since at the end of last episode, we learned about the tapes and how he may have had a romance with Laura. So the fact that the rock actually hit the bottle on his name leads me to believe that we should take the results of this bottle rock game seriously. Which leads us to where Leo's name is read. Now, we know he's guilty of at least drug dealing. When his name is read, the rock hits the bottle and shatters it. I do have one more observation from this rock game thing, but I'm going to save that for later in this part where I make my guess. The rock thing isn't the only weird thing that Agent Cooper does in this episode. At the end of the episode, we see him go to sleep and he starts to dream. Now, he had already mentioned that his dreams are where he came up with the idea for the bottle rock test. So we know that his dreams have some level of importance to his character and who he is. In the dream, we're in this weird red room, and it's like this dream state world. We see the one-armed man that we saw last episode in the hospital sneaking in to go see the coma patient. And he's talking about like devil worshiping or something like that. And the guy that he's talking to is the guy that Laura's mom had a vision of when she was having her breakdown in the living room. So these two seem to be like buddies or like a part of the same cult or something. We also meet this person who talks backwards but forwards. And this guy is sitting beside Laura Palmer, except it's not Laura Palmer, it's his cousin, who just happens to look a lot like Laura Palmer. They're talking to Agent Cooper, who's wearing like a lot of like prosthetic makeup. I don't know if it's to make him look older or just to make him look weird because this is like a dream world. And right at the end of the dream, Laura, or not Laura, leans in and whispers something in Agent Cooper's ear. Now, we can't hear what she said, but we do know that he immediately wakes up from his dream, grabs his phone, calls someone, and says, "I know who killed Laura Palmer." This is a lot to unpack. We're at the point where this might not be a traditional murder mystery, and once we leave that genre, anything goes. Another thing that worries me is that Agent Cooper claims to know who did it, which means, in theory, he could reveal who did it next episode. And if he does reveal it next episode, then that means this is our last chance to guess who did it before the reveal. But I don't know. I don't know if they're going to reveal it next episode. They could, probably not, but maybe. Now, I'm confident that it's not Bobby, the boyfriend. I'm confident that it's not James, who is who Laura was cheating on Bobby with. I'm also pretty confident that it's not Leo, the abusive trucker guy. I think that there's a possibility that Benjamin Horn, the businessman, could have been involved, but I think it's more likely that he's just like a part of it. From what I've seen, it looks like we're leading up to this one big bad killer who has people like Benjamin Horn in his ranks below him. This big bad who not only killed Laura, but is running the drug operation, who wants to put the mill out of business or burn it down. He's like a kingpin, and I think Laura's death is just a consequence of getting too close to this kingpin. And I think that the kingpin is the masked guy in the woods, which means that it's not Bobby, it's not Mike, and it's not Leo. Agent Cooper thinks that it's one of the Jays, but I'm not so sure about that. We also need to keep in mind that the guy who killed Laura has also killed somewhere else. Remember, he left a letter under the nail of that girl just like he left a letter under the nail of Laura, which feels like a very serial killer move. But here in Twin Peaks, we're dealing with something that doesn't feel like a serial killer. It feels a lot more personal, which leads me to two different theories. One, I could stick with my original guess, which is Andy, the crying cop. Maybe he's the kingpin that's in charge of all of this stuff in this town, and no one would ever suspect him because he's just a sad, empathetic cop. And nothing that we've talked about so far has disproved that he could be the killer. Now, I know what you're thinking. It also hasn't proved that he could be the killer. But there is one more piece of information from this episode that could be a major clue that it's Andy, the crying cop. I mentioned before that during the rock throwing scene, there was one more piece of information that I wanted to talk about, and this is that. At one point, they list a random suspect's name, and Agent Cooper throws the rock at the bottle. It misses by a mile and hits Andy in the face. Now, if we're going to take the rock test seriously, and I think that we should, what an interesting subconscious thing to do. His subconscious makes him throw the rock right at Andy. And I feel good about this theory because that seems like the kind of thing that after you know the reveal, you go back and you watch the show again, and when you see him get hit with the rock, you go, oh my God, how did I not see that? But I could also just be reaching because I really want my first guess to be right. My second theory is, what if it's the sheriff? Now, we haven't really learned a lot about Sheriff Harry S. Truman. And that's kind of weird, right? Like, he is one of the main characters. He's one of the people trying to solve this crime, and he's the sheriff of the town. And I keep telling myself, like, well, we'll learn more about him later. It's still early in the show. But the reveal could be next episode. Here's what we do know about him. We know that he is in a relationship with Josie, the owner of the mill. And we know that he does seem to be a pretty solid leader for the community. But that's about all we know. Agent Cooper is playing the Sherlock Holmes role in this mystery, and because of that, the sheriff has fallen into more of a Dr. Watson role, which is something that he even brings up in an episode. He says, I better start learning medicine. Huh? Because I'm Dr. Watson. In the mystery genre, there is a trope called the Dr. Watson did it, which is essentially when the Dr. Watson character, the sidekick to the main detective, is actually the killer. And you know what? maybe he is a great leader of the community because the community is sketchy. What if he's the kingpin of this giant operation of drugs and trafficking and taking over a mill and, all of this sketchy, weird stuff that's been going on in this small town? And who's gonna stop him? He's the sheriff. He's the leader of the community. They don't seem to have like a mayor or anything. They all look to him. And no one ever comes to this small town. He could get away with anything until Agent Cooper comes to town, where he immediately takes a step back and lets him take the lead on solving the mystery. And he's doing everything he can behind the scenes to mess up the investigation. So there we go. That's my pick for episode 3. Sheriff Harry S. Truman. Episode 4 is about Laura's funeral. Am I yelling? I'm sorry, I'm just getting a little bit stressed. Episode 4 was a really great episode. It was a ton of fun. We got to learn more about Twin Peaks, and we got quite a bit of answers to some questions we've been having. A question that I've been having a lot, actually, is kind of like what's up with Audrey, this character. And in this episode, it kind of focuses on her just a little bit more than normal. She seems to have this big crush on Agent Cooper, the guy trying to solve the mystery. And she's trying to help him out as much as she can because she thinks if she can help him solve the mystery, he'll fall in love with her and take her out of Twin Peaks. And the way that she's doing this is like mostly spying on her father and just trying to like lead Agent Cooper towards her father's direction, which is interesting. Another interesting thing is we find out that Laura actually does have a connection with the girl she was with when they were both attacked, the one that's in the coma. They both worked at the perfume counter at Horn's department store. Horn's department store is owned by, you guessed it, Benjamin Horn, the big bad businessman. Now I know what you're saying right now. Chase, who cares? At the end of last episode, we found out that Agent Cooper knows who the murderer is. Who is it? Well, he sits down for breakfast with the sheriff, and the sheriff goes, dude, who did it? And he was like, what happened was she whispered in my ear, who killed Laura Palmer? And they're like, what name did she whisper? And he goes, I can't remember. Now, personally, I think that this is a lie. Like, I think he does remember who did it, or at least who the person in his dream said did it. But that's the thing. You can't convict someone, you can't arrest someone based on a dream that you had. So he's gonna keep that name to himself so that he can further investigate without anything getting out into the town who they're actually going for. Which lines up with my theory from last episode where I said maybe the sheriff did it. I mean, how crazy would that be? The dream version of Laura Palmer or whoever that lady was whispers who killed Laura Palmer in his ear, and it's Sheriff Harry S. Truman. And now the sheriff's like, well, who did it? You don't want to tell him. He's the one who did it. And that way he can stay close to the sheriff without the sheriff getting, on his toes about it. Speaking of the sheriff, we do see a little bit more of his dark side in this episode as well. The CSI guy who came in and has been kind of really rude to everybody, well, Sheriff Truman punches him in the face, which does show that he's not always Mr. Nice Guy. He does have an aggressive side to him. However, if I'm being honest, we learned something in this episode that makes me think maybe my last theory that the sheriff did it isn't exactly, it's probably not it. He probably didn't do it. Because we find out that Sheriff Truman is like the leader of a secret society. Now, the secret society in Twin Peaks has existed for generations. He was like, the men before us and the men before them have battled the evil that is in Twin Peaks. The secret society is called the Bookhouse Boys, and it involves people like Officer Hawk, Big Ed, remember Big Ed, and James. And I think there's others involved as well. We just only kind of know those. It turns out that the Bookhouse Boys have been investigating the drug operation that's going on in Twin Peaks. And they've circled it all back to the kingpin, or at least who they think is the kingpin of the operation, Jacques. Now, Jacques is this guy right here. He's the bartender at the Roadhouse, which does give us an answer to one of the mysteries, which is who drugged Big Ed. Well, Jacques was the bartender at the Roadhouse where he got drugged and was staking out Jacques for the secret society. Now, they think that Jacques is the big bad guy of this whole operation, which is not the case, but they do get something right. Jacques and his brother are a part of the drug operation with Leo, the trucker guy. And Jacques' brother gets arrested with an ounce of cocaine, so the sheriff and the Bookhouse Boys take Jacques' brother to their secret clubhouse, and they start just kind of like laying into him. And they include Agent Cooper, which leads me to believe that the Bookhouse Boys and the sheriff are good guys. Like, why would they bring Agent Cooper in on on their secret society if there was nefarious means. And along with some answers, this episode does give us a few more mysteries. For example, we find out that Norma Jennings, remember, she's the lady who owns the diner and is having an affair with Big Ed. Well, her husband is in jail for manslaughter. And it looks like he's going to be getting out of jail soon, so we'll see how that goes. Oh, and another little reveal that we got that we kind of already knew is that Catherine, the evil sister-in-law, probably killed her brother. Her brother being Josie's husband, who owned the mill and then, left the mill to Josie. I believe Catherine and Ben the businessman, who are having an affair together, are working together to try to get the mill's land. So they probably killed her brother. So who do I want to lock in for this episode? There's still so much mystery on this board. For example, who did Bobby kill? Did they hire Bobby to kill Josie's husband? Or is that a totally separate situation? I will say I do think Bobby is innocent in Laura Palmer's murder. At Laura's funeral, he gets really upset and he calls everyone there hypocrites because everyone in this town knew that Laura was in trouble and no one did anything, including him. And then the funeral ends with a big fight between him and James. Another thing that kind of throws a wrench into the mystery is that when the sheriff is telling Agent Cooper about the secret society, he talks about this dark, evil darkness in the woods of Twin Peaks, which makes it feel very supernatural. And we have all this stuff about it, like this cult where they have a one-armed man, and the reason that he has a one arm is because he had the cult's symbol on his arm, and so he cut it off because he was done with killing. Or at least that's what Agent Cooper saw in his dream. So while we did get quite a few little reveals in this episode, we still have a whole lot of mystery left to unravel. I mean, we have all of this supernatural stuff, the cult stuff. It's going to be a lot, and we are officially at the halfway point of this mystery. So this is probably where things are going to start getting really intense. So even though we have all this supernatural and cult stuff that I'm sure that we'll learn later on, with the information that we have right now, I think we're still looking for one big bad kingpin mystery masked man who is the kingpin of this whole crime operation and who killed Laura Palmer. And I think that mystery masked man is going to be someone we know. And I think that it's Andy the Crying Cop. I know, I need to get over this theory, but you just don't understand. I think I'm onto something. Because Andy is not a part of the Bookhouse Boys, but the other officer, Hawk, is. So how come poor Andy didn't get included into this secret society? Maybe it's because everyone thinks he's a pathetic little and that's what he wants you to think. Yeah, he wants everybody to think he is just an incompetent loser. So that way, nobody knows that it's secretly him running all of the crime. He's getting information from inside the police station, but they don't think he's nefarious. He's a loser. And maybe he's even the leader of the cult. So I'm locking it in, baby. Andy the Crying Cop. Yes, son, let's go. The show is heating up, and we are flying closer and closer to the reveal, and the closer we get, the weirder it gets. Like, did you know that Laura and her mom are both psychic? Now, they don't just come out and say that they're psychic, but they keep talking about how they have these visions. Another crazy thing is that we linger on the police station receptionist girl. She's kind of involved in the investigation, but she's watching a soap opera, and we linger on that soap opera for a good moment. And the soap opera is about a secret twin who's revealed to be the other twin because no one could tell the difference, which is pretty convenient considering that last episode, Laura's cousin arrived in Twin Peaks. And Laura's cousin looks identical to Laura. Now, in the same soap opera scene, they were like, hey, what's going on? And then she just gives them the plot to the soap opera, and it's played off like a joke because they're like, no, like, what's happening in Twin Peaks? And she's like, oh. But I think that the soap opera plot that she explains is oddly familiar to the plot of what's going on with the mill. You know what I'm talking about. You've been watching this video. Oh, and before we move on from the receptionist, hey, guess who she's dating? Andy the Crying Cop. Yeah, that's right. I'm not off Andy yet. I'm coming for you, Andy. I've had my eyes on you since episode 1. So their little plot line for this episode is that Andy has been seeing the receptionist, and she's been kind of off-putting towards him, and he's like, hey, why didn't I get to stay the night last night? In fact, we see a lot of Andy this episode, and all of it is showing just how incompetent he is. There's a moment in the episode where the sheriff and Agent Cooper are about to bust in on the one-armed man's hotel room, and right before they get in there, Andy drops his gun and it goes off. And then later, when they're at the gun range to practice after the whole dropping the gun incident, he misses all of his shots. And everyone's like, oh, look at Andy, he sucks. Oh, shucks, Andy wouldn't hurt a fly, ha ha ha. Anyway, enough about Andy, because I'm pretty sure at this point I'm just delusional and I'm looking for clues to prove that Andy's right. But it's getting suspicious. We find out a lot more about the drug operation in this episode. I mentioned in the last part that they think that Jacques is the kingpin, but that's not the case, and it's proven in this episode because we find out Jacques the bartender is working under Leo, remember, the abusive trucker guy. So because Jacques' brother gets kidnapped by the secret society, they're kind of tipped off that their investigation is getting close. So Jacques, with the help of Leo, cross the border and they get Jacques into hiding. However, Jacques' brother messed up. He got arrested, and he's the reason that they are getting investigated so heavily, so Leo kills him. And after he kills him, he meets up with his boss, Mr. Benjamin Horn. That's right. I was right. I suspected that he is involved in this whole crime organization, and in fact, he is over Leo. But I don't think Mr. Horn is the kingpin. No, because Mr. Horn, I think he has someone above him who's that mystery masked man, because I do not think that he was the mystery masked man in the woods in that episode. Horn gives Leo his next assignment, which is to burn down the mill. Now, we've been talking about this mill getting burned down for several episodes, and it's looking like it's finally about to happen. He wants Leo to burn it down and make it look like Josie burned it down because it was failing, because it was, they were going out of business, which is not the case, but they've been cooking the books. In this episode, we find out some more about Laura's body. We find out that she had bird scratches on her. We also know that Jacques has a bird that matches the description of the claw marks. We also find a poker chip from One-Eyed Jack's in Laura's stomach. Now, we know that Laura was working at One-Eyed Jack's as a lady of the night. Well, let me rephrase that. We don't know that, but it's strongly implied between the poker chip and what we've learned, and then also a conversation that Audrey has with Donna, the best friend. See, we talked about how Audrey wants to solve the murder so that way she can make Agent Cooper fall in love with her and he'll take her away, and she's roped in Donna, who's Laura's best friend, to help with her investigation. Oh well, let's go back to our main boy, Bobby. Now, we've pretty much cleared Bobby of being the person who killed Laura Palmer, even though he was her boyfriend. So remember, he's having an affair with Leo's wife. Now, Leo's wife works at the diner, and she found a bloody shirt in Leo's laundry. Remember that? We've talked about that. Well, it looks like Bobby is trying to frame Leo for the murder of Laura Palmer so that way he'll go to jail and he can be with Leo's wife. Oh, and bro, speaking of wives, remember how I talked about how Big Ed, who he's cheating on his wife with, Norma Jennings, at the diner? Well, last episode I mentioned that her husband is in jail for manslaughter. Well, he is getting out of jail and he's coming home. He's right here. This is this guy, Mr. Jennings, the jailbird, and he keeps playing with these dominoes. And then at the end of this episode, he sends a hand-drawn domino to Josie. And then he calls her, like right when she opens the letter. Like, how did he know that she had just opened that letter? So it seems like he has some sort of business with Josie. There's some more layers to this plot now. And these layers, I think, can be explained with the soap opera plot that we heard about earlier in the episode. Remember how I said that it was very familiar to the whole issue with the mill? In the soap opera plot, it talks about how a lady seduced someone to get the property, and then she betrayed him, or something like that. My theory, if we take that soap opera plot and apply it to the mill, it means maybe Catherine and Benjamin didn't kill Josie's husband. Maybe Josie was working with the domino guy, Mr. Jennings, and she killed her own husband after seducing him just to try to get the land. And maybe the reason she's with Mr. Sheriff Truman right now is because she's seducing him in the same way to try to get him off of her trail. This episode has been a lot, and I know that this is getting more and more confusing. Like, can you imagine if you have never watched this show and you're watching this video right now? Okay, it's time to lock in my guess, but before I do, we really need to try to make sense of this whole Laura potentially swapping places with her cousin thing. Now, none of this is confirmed. This is all my theory. Remember when Agent Cooper had that dream about the Red Room with this guy, and this guy had a cousin who looked exactly like Laura Palmer. Remember? And they really made sure to be like, this is not Laura Palmer. This is just this guy's cousin who looks like Laura Palmer. We keep getting this thread about this spirit world. We've had it with Agent Cooper, and he's had conversations with Officer Hawk about it. We know that Laura and her mom both had visions. The spirit world is where dead people go. And you can access the spirit world through dreaming, and not just like going to sleep dreaming, also coma patients. And then there's people like Laura's mom and Laura herself who maybe just have visions that direct into this spirit world. I think that the girl who everyone thinks is Laura Palmer, the girl who was murdered, was not actually Laura Palmer. It's Laura's cousin or someone who just looks exactly like Laura. And I think that Laura knew what kind of trouble she was in Twin Peaks and escaped, switching places with this girl to try to get herself to safety. Then when she hears that Laura, the girl she switched with, is killed, she goes back to Twin Peaks as her cousin in an effort to try to comfort her parents. She didn't know that this was going to happen, and she feels terrible that all of her friends and family think that she's dead. And she's perfectly safe because the Kingpin and all of the stuff that she got involved with, they all think that she's dead. This is just Laura's cousin. And I think this lookalike Laura is the person that Agent Cooper was talking to in his dream. Remember, she made very clear, I am not Laura Palmer, I just look like her. Now, this does not help us at all about who killed Laura Palmer, or, the lookalike Laura Palmer. We're looking for the Kingpin. And so far in this video, my guesses for who the Kingpin is and who killed Laura Palmer has been Andy the Crying Cop and Sheriff Harry S. Truman. But I actually have a new suspect to lock in. Norma Jennings, the lady who owns the diner. Now, a quick refresh of who she is. She is cheating on her husband, who's in jail for manslaughter. This guy. She's cheating on him with Big Ed, who we've deduced is a pretty good guy. She hasn't been too much of a main character, but she has been in every episode for the most part. She has a J name. And remember, Agent Cooper thinks that we're looking for someone with the letter J in their name. But the piece of evidence that I think really solidifies her as my pick for this episode is a conversation that she has with her husband at his prison hearing. He asks her if business is good. Now, this is kind of played off like he's talking about the diner that she owns, but I think maybe he could mean a different business. Plus, he has this whole thing with Josie with the dominoes and stuff. So maybe he's just doing stuff like this on his wife's orders. She could be the kingpin of this operation and just have all of these men doing her bidding. So that is my locked in pick for this episode, Norma Jennings. Okay, episode 6 is a bit of a weaker episode, but it has some pretty big moments. First, let's talk about Leo and his bloody shirt that his wife found in his laundry. Now, I said when we first saw this in like the second episode or whatever that it was pretty obviously a red herring, and we find out that it is the case in this episode. Last episode, Bobby, he was trying to frame Leo, like get him caught by the cops for Laura's murder, so that way he'll go to jail and Bobby can be with Leo's wife. And it kind of works. The cops do find Leo's shirt and they know that it's Leo's shirt, but they test the blood and the blood is not Laura Palmer's. So yeah, we also get a lot of conversation about the Flesh World magazine. Remember that clue from early in the season? I'm gonna be completely honest, I don't quite understand what they were talking about, and I don't know if it was because I wasn't like paying attention good enough. I mean, I thought I was, but it could also just be the fact that like catalogs and magazines and like the stuff that they were talking about really isn't from my generation. I don't know anything about catalogs and magazines. It'd be like if you went to someone in the 1950s and be like, did you get that DM on TikTok? They'd be like, huh? Also, Norma Jennings, her husband is out of jail and he shows up at her diner where he overhears Donna and James's plans. They are working with Laura's cousin who looks just like her to try to solve Laura's murder themselves. We also see this guy jump Leo. He beats him up really bad, leaves his face all bloody, and he essentially tells him to know his role. So it seems like old Jailbird here was a little bit higher up in the crime organization than Leo, and he's getting kind of onto Leo to, know his role now that he's back. And I think maybe Norma is involved in this. My guess last episode was that she's the big kingpin, and this kind of could line up in that plan. Speaking of Norma. Her and Big Ed, remember, she's been cheating on her husband who was in jail with Big Ed, who's a nice guy, it seems. Well, they actually kind of break up in this episode. They kind of go their separate ways, back to their own spouses. Maybe this breakup kind of ends that story arc with Norma, so that way she can go on to the big reveal. Anyway, I could be wrong. Speaking of stuff that I think that I'm wrong about, you know how I went on a really long rant about how I think Laura's cousin is actually Laura in disguise? Well, I don't think that's the case anymore. It does seem like they are different people, and now she's involved in trying to figure out who did it. But I do think that there is something to the whole fact that the soap opera was talking about a twin that looked so identical that you couldn't even tell the difference. And I think maybe the way that arc wraps up is that Donna and James are going to use her to dress up as Laura or something and get information from people. Another reason that I think I was wrong about that is we see Bobby in this episode, and he actually goes and visits Dr. Jacoby. Not in a what happened to Laura kind of way, but in he's a therapist and he needs therapy. And he tells Dr. Jacoby that Laura forced him to sell drugs so that she would have access to them. And it just kind of really seems like Laura was actually very abusive and not a great person to him. Which leads me to think hey, what if Laura's the kingpin? You know what I mean? What if she's the one on top? Bobby also says in the scene that Laura had such a big secret that she wanted to die because of it. And he explicitly tells Dr. Jacoby that she did want to die. Meanwhile, Agent Cooper and the sheriff find a cabin in the woods that seems to be the place where Laura was first attacked and tied up. That's about all they did this episode, other than a really weird conversation with the log lady. Bringing up things from the last episode, I did mention that I think Josie might not be as innocent as we think she is, and that would also prove to be the case in this episode. She's working with Benjamin Horn, the business guy, which is a pretty shocking revelation. I mean, we know all the shady stuff that he's involved with. What does she have to do with it? Could Josie be our kingpin? I guess we'll have to find out. All of this leads to the end of the episode where Leo, all beaten up by Mr. Jailbird over here, he goes home, face bloody, and his wife is scared, and so she shoots him. But we don't know what happens next. We don't know if she killed him and now she gets to be with Bobby, or if she missed and now she's in big trouble. Either way, I think things are about to get wild. Okay, it's time for me to lock in my pick for this episode. And, compared to the last part, you're probably thinking, wow, Chase seems a lot more calm, a lot more melancholy. And it's because I don't know what's going on anymore. I am more lost now than I have been in the entire time. And we only have 2 episodes left, which means that the reveal could happen at any moment. So we need to try to be as accurate as possible, but this is a point where I feel the least confident as ever. So far, we have officially guessed 3 people: Andy the crying cop, the sheriff, and Norma Jennings. And I'm gonna tell you right now, I don't think it's the sheriff. In fact, I'm pretty embarrassed that that was one of my picks. But I do still feel good about Andy the crying cop and Norma Jennings. But what if it's not them? Am I just gonna coast to the ending with the same 3 guesses and then potentially not guess who did it? Or should I do something a little left field and try to cover my bases? I thought for a moment about being like, hey, Laura Palmer did it, which would be pretty abstract considering she's the one who died. But then I started thinking about the other girl victim, and she's in a coma, and I don't see why Laura Palmer would do that. And then there's this whole thing going on with Norma Jennings and her husband, and that's really just kind of got thrown on us in the last few episodes. Her husband seems to be pretty involved in this whole operation, but he couldn't have done it because he was in jail when she died. His wife, however, has been pretty involved with the whole show from episode 1. Maybe she is the kingpin. When Mr. Jennings first gets out of jail and shows up at the diner, he goes to her and he's like, I'm going to do whatever I can for you to take me back. And then the next time we see him, he's beating up Leo Johnson. Could that be for her? I'm gonna lock in Norma again, guys. Okay, things are getting stressful. This is episode 7, as in the last episode before the finale, which means that this is our last chance to guess the killer. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm a bit worried. because we're starting to tie up all of these different character arcs, which means we're not necessarily getting closer to seeing who the killer is, but we are eliminating a lot of suspects. For example, in this episode, the receptionist at the sheriff's department has a conversation on the phone with her doctor that leads me to believe that she might be pregnant with Andy the crying cop's baby, which is not good for me. Because I've been kind of expecting for the end of Andy the crying cop's incompetent cop story arc to end with him being an evil mastermind. But instead, it's looking like the end of that arc might actually be one of a hero. Oh, Andy, he's so stupid and incompetent. He can't even shoot his gun. And then in the final episode, he gets in a shootout with the bad guy, and he is the one who saves the sheriff and Agent Cooper. But I guess we'll just have to see. In this episode, we find out that for certain, Laura Palmer was with 3 people the night that she died. Leo, the abusive trucker guy, Jacques, the bartender, and the girl who was also attacked and put in a coma. Now, this is heavily implying that Leo is the killer. In fact, tons of stuff happens in this episode that's really heavily pointing at Leo as the guy who did it. But I think that this is one big final red herring, so that the whole audience is thinking it's Leo right before the reveal. Leo, in this episode, after getting shot by his wife in the arm, he survives. He's hunting down Bobby because he finds out that Bobby has been with his wife. But before he can kill Bobby, he overhears something on the police scanner. They're talking about how they have a witness from the night that Laura died. And the witness was the parrot that was in the cabin. So Leo, he sets up shop across from the police station and shoots the bird. But before the bird gets shot, it starts mimicking the things that it heard that night. And they had a tape recorder set up to capture all of it. And the bird was mimicking Laura crying for help. And the bird specifically says, "Leo, no." So it's pretty obvious who Agent Cooper and the sheriff are going to be gunning for. We get some pretty big reveals in this episode, none of them helping me at all try to figure out who killed Laura Palmer, but it does solve a lot of mysteries. For example, it turns out that the store manager at the department store where Laura worked at the perfume counter, he is the one who is getting the girls involved at One-Eyed Jack's to be, ladies of the night. We see Josie working with Ben to burn down the mill, just like how Catherine wants to burn down the mill. However, Josie wants to burn down the mill with Catherine inside, so that way she can get the insurance money and Catherine's life insurance policy, which is pretty wild. Meanwhile, James and Donna, they dress up Laura's cousin to look just like Laura, which I called, by the way. And while that's going down, Bobby sabotages James's motorcycle so that way it's gonna explode or something. Also, while Laura's cousin is dressed up like Laura, there's a creepy point of view shot, kind of like in the Halloween movies, of a creepy stalker guy watching the fake Laura in the woods. And he's breathing heavy, and it just kind of seems like maybe this is the guy who killed Laura, and now he's like, oh my god, it's her, I'm obsessed with her. But I actually think that it might just be Laura's dad, Leland, who's been kind of going crazy. And I think it's more of a, oh my god, my daughter is still alive, she's right there. Or it could be the killer. I mean, we're almost at the last episode. It could just be the killer. All right, boys and girls, this is it. This is our last chance to try to guess who did it. Can we solve Twin Peaks before the reveal? Let's go through each and every suspect. This is Mike. He's Bobby's best friend and someone who's really not that important. We have Bobby, Laura's boyfriend, and at the beginning of the show, he was a pretty large red herring with all of the signs pointed directly at him. But it's become pretty clear that he is not the killer. In fact, it looks like he himself might have been a victim of Laura. He's got some stuff going on, though, he's got Leo trying to kill him, he's trying to kill James. And rumor is that he killed a guy. He's not innocent by any means, but I don't think he killed Laura Palmer. Since we mentioned Leo, let's jump up to him. Now, Leo has been a huge suspect for these last few episodes, and honestly, since we first saw him. But I still stand by my initial statement when we first meet him that he is just a huge red herring. I think that the show is wanting everyone to think that it's Leo, and a lot of stuff has lined up to Leo. He's involved with the drug stuff, we know that he's killed a guy, and He just killed the bird in the sheriff's station to keep the sheriff from figuring out he was with Laura that night. So he's definitely involved, but I don't think he's the killer. Dr. Jacoby. Dr. Jacoby is a really weird guy who was in love with his high school therapy patient. I think that he loved Laura too much to kill her, and plus, like, she was talking to him about all this stuff and about this mysterious person she meets in the woods, and that's who I think killed her. So while he is definitely creepy and there's something going on with him, I don't think he killed her. Big Ed. Now, if Big Ed is revealed as the killer, I will be shocked. It would be a huge twist. However, I think it would be a reveal that would make everyone kind of feel cheated. He seems to be a good guy, and he's heavily involved in helping Agent Cooper and the sheriff. Plus, he's part of the Bookhouse Boys, man. He's a part of the secret society that goes like this. Log Lady. I don't even think she's a suspect. I think she's just a crazy lady. James. Now, James was a huge suspect at first, with all fingers pointed at him in that first episode with the necklace and the J name and the whole being with Laura the night she died. And to be completely honest, the show never said that it wasn't James. I think we as an audience came to that conclusion on our own. So what I'm saying is it could be James, but I heavily think that it's not. The One-Armed Man. Now, we still have a whole storyline to wrap up with the One-Armed Man and all of the supernatural cult stuff, but I don't think we have enough information at this point to accuse him, so I assume that he's not it. Norma Jennings. Norma Jennings is the owner of the diner. Now, she was seeing Big Ed for the majority of this show, and I think because of that, we assume she was a good person. And then now at the end of the season, we have all this stuff with her husband who just got out of jail, and it seems like maybe there's more to her than just the nice lady who owns the diner. Norma has been my locked-in pick for the past few episodes, and I still think she is a really strong contender to be my final pick. Ben Horn, the businessman, the guy that's wrapped up in all of this shady stuff. I mean, he is involved in a lot, right? The murder of other people. He's involved in all of the drug dealing stuff. He's involved with this mill property fire stuff, but I don't think that he is involved with Laura Palmer's murder. At least, I don't think he's the one who killed her. Ben's brother Jerry, he's just kind of an idiot. Mr. Jennings. Now, he is Norma's husband who just got out of jail. He is definitely involved in some stuff, he's got all that stuff going on with Josie. He beat up Leo, but I'm pretty sure he was in jail when Laura died, so I don't think it's even a possibility that it's him. Catherine, the evil sister-in-law. Now, we know Catherine's all wrapped up with Ben Horn and all of that shady stuff, and it looks like she's trying to take out her sister-in-law, Josie, and vice versa. But I don't know what she would have to do with Laura's death. I don't even know if she's even talked about Laura's death. I don't know if they've had any sort of connection this whole show. Josie. Now, she married the owner of the mill, and then after he mysteriously died in an accident, which was either Catherine and Ben Horn killing him or Josie herself killing him, which leaves Josie the mill. And it looks like she's wrapped up in some weird stuff, with Mr. Jennings and something to do with the mill and Catherine's life insurance policy. Jacques, the bartender. Jacques is the bartender who was dealing drugs under Leo. He was with Laura the night that she died. And he's become pretty involved in all of the stuff that's been going on the past few episodes, like the Flesh World magazine. It being his bird who scratched Laura. But I'd be pretty surprised if he is revealed as the killer because we've only seen him one time. For the most part, he's just spoken about. Sheriff Harry S. Truman. Now, I actually picked the sheriff as one of my official picks in this video, and while I don't think I was wrong to suspect him at the time, I do not think that is the case any longer. So I don't think he's the killer, but you never know, he could be. Laura's cousin. Now, I actually thought that this was Laura in disguise, which I don't think is the case anymore. I suppose there's a chance that maybe her cousin is just a psychopath who killed Laura because she wanted to have her life or something like that, but she kind of showed up late. I would be surprised if that was her. And I don't even know if that goes with any of the other evidence we have. Agent Dale Cooper. This was the man who was sent by the FBI to solve this case. I think he's pretty obviously not the killer. I think he definitely has some sort of secret wrapped up, but the fact that he's not from Twin Peaks means that his secret probably has nothing to do with this place. The only thing that makes me think oh, maybe it is him is the fact that the person who killed Laura Palmer has killed another girl at a different place and left a letter under her fingernail as well, which is a very serial killer motive, and that doesn't really mix well with the Twin Peaks small town conspiracy that we've been investigating this whole time. So I guess the theory is he's not actually an FBI agent, he's a serial killer who is like pretending to investigate the own crime that he committed. That's a long shot though, so that one's just me spitballing. This guy from the dreams, I'm not even sure he's real, let alone a suspect. Audrey Horne, the daughter of Ben Horne, the businessman. She's in love with Agent Cooper, and it seems like she really wants to help solve the case so that, he'll fall in love with her. I don't think she's the killer, and I think that her arc is probably going to conclude with her being the downfall of her father, which would be pretty rewarding. But yeah, definitely not the killer. Donna, the best friend. At one point in this video, I said, well, maybe Donna killed Laura, because she was jealous and she wanted James. But I don't think that's right. I think she does really love James, and they're working together to solve Laura's death, because I think she really loved Laura too. Which leads us to Andy, the crying cop. My arch nemesis. I already talked about how the end of his arc might actually be a heroic one, but I have felt good about this pick since I made it in the first episode. A lot of things do seem to line up with him, but I do think maybe I'm just trying to force it. But I do really want it to be Andy, and I stand behind it that he would be a great killer. The only person left on the wall is Laura Palmer herself. We know that she was involved in drug dealing, she was addicted to drugs herself, she was a lady of the night and notorious for bending men to do her will, like Bobby, Dr. Jacoby, James. And we know that she had some big secret that made her want to die. There's always the possibility that Laura did do it, that the reason she died was because of herself. But I think most likely she's just a high school kid who got in a rough situation and kind of lost herself along the way, which led to her demise. So who do I pick for my final guess? I would be pretty embarrassed if the killer is revealed and it's not even one of the characters that I have on the wall. Like Catherine's husband, for instance. Like, he's the one who found Laura's body in the first episode, but I didn't think it was him, and so I didn't put him on the wall. What if it is him and I just didn't notice any of the clues that were pointing directly at him? Another thing that I'm worried about is what if the reveal doesn't happen in the season finale? There is a second season of this show, and I kind of just assumed that the second season was a different mystery, but that might not be the case. And we still have this huge supernatural dream world story to solve. I do feel really good about my Norma Jennings pick, but she does not line up with all of the evidence. But the person who does line up with all of the evidence, Leo, seems way too obvious. I do think Andy would be a great reveal, but I don't know if that is really the case anymore. Plus, this is David Lynch we're talking about. The reveal could be this surrealist, wild thing. I mean, we've been getting these weird soap opera moments on the TV screens of the characters throughout the show. What if the reveal is a very soap opera ending? Like it's someone's long lost twin, or Laura isn't actually dead. The killer changed their gender, or Laura is the killer and the victim. Like Laura and her cousin were both Laura Palmer, and there was the wild one and then there was the sweet one, and they lived the same life, switching out without anybody noticing. Wild stuff like that, you know? We wouldn't be able to guess stuff like that. Okay, I've rambled enough. Oh man. My final pick before the reveal is Norma Jennings. Oh God. Oh God. So I just watched the finale. And it was such a great episode. Everything was coming together. It was so cool. And I started getting some things right. Josie did hire this guy to kill her husband. And now she's... And I was right about that. And I was right about Andy, the crying cop. Well, I wasn't right about him being the killer. But I was right about him having that heroic moment where he saves the sheriff by shooting the gun. And then we're getting close to the end, and we're starting to eliminate some suspects, and everything's starting to come together. We're getting a lot of cool like moments where everything's starting to come up together. And then we see Agent Cooper, and he's right here, and he's in his hotel room, and it seems like they're gonna get Leo Johnson. They think it's Leo Johnson, and I'm like, oh no, was it Leo Johnson? Did I get it wrong? And then Agent Cooper gets shot. He gets shot, and then it cuts to the credits. We don't know. We didn't get the reveal. We don't know who did it. I knew this was gonna happen. I wasn't able to research the show before watching it because I didn't want to see spoilers. And so now, in order to find out who killed Laura Palmer, I gotta watch season 2. And season 2 has 22 episodes. And so now I took my time with this video because I was like, oh, it's just 8 episodes, and now, so this is like an hour-long video, and it was supposed to end with us figuring out if we guessed it, but now there's more to do. So can I solve Twin Peaks before the reveal? I guess you'll have to subscribe and watch part 2 to find out.